Alright, so on top of all the new stuff that came out today, I also decided to do some catching up on some stuff I hadn't seen that was still out. So, this video is ridiculous in size, so let's just do this. I think we're going to go ahead and start with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is kind of surprising in the kind of reaction that it's got. Not only is it winning awards already, but, like, even critically, it's like at a 97 on Rotten Tomatoes or something, and people are going, like, totally crazy for it, saying it's, like, possibly the best Spider-Man movie ever made. And I do remember that it seemed a bit excessive, and people kind of raised their eyebrows a little bit when the whole continuous joke, particularly with Sony's involvement, is the idea of Spider-Man just keeps getting resurrected. And so ever since 2002 and forward, there's been so many different reincarnations already. And so with Civil War and Homecoming finally making him a big deal in the Marvel Universe, people kind of assumed we were done, but then pretty much simultaneously it was announced that there would also be an unrelated animated movie as well, which would have Phil and Chris Miller's names on it, which does mean something, but even so, it was still a question of why, what is it even about, and is it really necessary? And then as we started to get more information on it, it was mainly the main appeal seemed to be going in the Miles Morales direction, which is the way a lot of people wanted it to go before Tom Holland was cast, and they wanted Donald Glover to do it and all that. Before he ended up playing his uncle, go figure. So the thing here is, this is basically, I mean, I'm not as big on Spider-Man as I am, or as well-informed, I guess I should say, as something on, as, like, Batman, for instance. So, when we came out of the Lego Batman movie a couple years ago, I had said that, even though it was, like, an unrelated animated movie outside of the live-action movies, it was basically the movie that every Batman fan had ever dreamed of. And even though I'm not as well-informed on Spider-Man, I'm going to go ahead and assume that's probably how a lot of Spider-Man fans will feel about this, if I had to guess. Especially since they're very similar in tone and their approach to some of the humor, like the whole, like it ends up being a running joke throughout, but obviously the very start feels like a joke in itself when we have Chris Pine's incarnation of Peter Parker narrating and telling us, okay, here it is for one last time, and then he goes through the backstory just real quick, because, once again, it's basically a running joke in this series now that we have too many versions of the same versions of Peter Parker's backstory. And I do, like, I get where they're coming from, obviously, and I do think this is going to work on its target audience, but I have talked a lot recently about how the meta humor is sort of something that I personally feel like has really run its course. So when we reach a scene in, like, the first 2 minutes of them poking fun at the dancing scene in Spider-Man 3 and saying, like, we don't talk about that, I'm pretty sure they made that exact... I think the Green Lantern has had a joke thrown at him a couple of times in the DC Universe like that when they were doing, like, the whole meta thing. So this just feels like, oh yeah, you took a dig at the dancing scene in Spider-Man 3. How daring, 11 years later, nobody has done that yet. So I kind of worried with stuff like that, but there was still clearly something creative going on here, especially with all the different sort of tones we're going to come into this. The really interesting thing about this is you look at, like, like, the Avenger movies, for instance, and you say when all the heroes come together, it's so great how they're able to write that smoothly to where all the characters actually come into play, even though they're coming from different directions, but they still feel like sort of in the same universe. And this movie's particular thing is they're going to have to juggle, like, every Spider-Man that's coming from a different place brings a different tone with them. And they've got to not just juggle the characters, but that too. Which actually works surprisingly well, even using different variations of animation. This is... because that's something that does stand out also, is... The animation in this is probably something that, if people aren't expecting it, with me, like, avoiding trailers, it wasn't really... I wasn't quite sure exactly what it looked like, but I had heard that it was sort of a different style, where it was like... when you look at it, it's like there is a sort of almost realism to it, like just how detailed it is and how they move and all that, and how they actually look like real people, but at the same time they still have the like exaggerated features of an animated character, and it's like this somehow this weird blending of that, and that's really interesting. It does feel really refreshing, not just for superhero movies, but for animated movies in general also. Um, and of course, the characters are really strong too, particularly with Miles at the center of it, because they do a lot. Really, with all the characters, but specifically Miles, they do something to make they do give him a whole bunch of traits and all that, and just the story around him also that makes him feel like real, despite the fact that he's in this fantastical animated world, which is really gonna really be at the core of this and really needs to stay there, and they do manage to do that quite well. Like I said, even when the things are going like totally completely crazy, there's like always some sort of emotional foundation to this movie. Interestingly enough, despite all that they have going on, if they do have if this movie does have a bit of a problem, at least from where I'm coming from, and some people might even see this as like a compliment, which I'm sure to an extent it is, but I almost feel like there's too much going on, which of course will be rewarding when you see it like, over and over again, but it is a whole shitload to take in, like all at once, to where it almost feels like a bit too busy. And it is, we talked about this with Lego Batman also, among many other things, especially in animated movies, where they can really, like, be as detailed as they possibly want with hardly any constraints, particularly not having the constraints of real life. There's, like, a whole lot going on in the background, you can tell also. Like, this is one of those things where I'm sure there's going to be, like, 50 million YouTube videos just talking about all the inside jokes and Easter eggs and background shit and all that. Which obviously I don't want to do, but another thing to go into is the style of it. Obviously, the thing that I really like is it seems pretty obvious to do, especially doing an animated version, doing the whole sort of comic book look where you've got, the locations and the voice bubbles and all that. But the thing that I actually really love is that it's not that style until after he's been bitten, and then it just starts to become part of his world very suddenly. And he seems somewhat aware that it's like that, but there's like a gray area there. So I guess it depends on how they do the meta thing, where like a lot of things, like for instance, poking fun at Spider-Man 3 is something that's just really old at this point, but something like that, if they do it clever enough, which for the most part they do, that's the kind of meta stuff I still don't mind. But the thing also is the fact that just this movie has so much energy pretty much nonstop. Like, it does have time for those emotional breaks, especially to really strengthen some of the characters. Sometimes strengthening characters you don't expect to be strengthened in an emotional way. Like, even the Kingpin has some emotional backstory, weirdly enough. But the thing here is that with all the... Like I said, they can just really go crazy with the appearance of it, because a lot of times superhero movies have been getting flack lately for being kind of bland looking, and then people kind of looked at the Guardians of the Galaxy movies as like this big savior because those movies are so like blasting with energy and color and all that. The end of this movie, like the final climax of this movie, makes Guardians of the Galaxy look like it's in black and white. Like that is just how crazy and like just bursting with everything that it can possibly throw at you that it does. And like I said, you can sort of see where this absolutely is a good thing, that the movie's doing this, but it's also, it can grow a bit tiresome because maybe it's almost too energetic by the time it reaches the end, which, like I said, could be something that totally changes if I were to see it again and be able to take more in, since I would at least know half of what's there, but there's probably a whole other half that I would see for the first time, despite having already seen it. And it does, like, it does have some things going for it that might seem like when we see the different characters, it is nice that they're able to, like I said, really play with the different styles as they come into it, and sometimes blend them depending on which characters are together or which ones are interacting. Because it does seem like that this could be, like, it almost could be, like, simply a gimmick to just put, like, Spider-Ham in there, or, the Spider-Man Noir in there, or whatever, and be able to have, like, the comic book people tell the not comic book people, did you know that those things actually exist? So that in itself almost seems like a gimmick on the surface, so I like that they took it a little farther than that and actually put a lot of care into all the individual ones. So, and also talking about the going back to the energy I was talking about. As I was talking about how you get that instantly. It's like even the opening logos. Like the Sony logo and all the different ones, are like seizure-inducing, like at the very start. But the fact that it's not constantly like that does help, because we do get this start where, like I said, we get to see Miles become like kind of a real character before it gets really super duper fantastical. Seeing like his relationship with his parents, and then when he goes to school, and then with his uncle and all that, and all of this obviously ends up having these big emotional payoffs, not just like at the end, but like throughout, which I liked also, because it's obviously Spider-Man movies tend to be, or at least like introductory Spider-Man movies tend to be known for like maybe one or two emotional scenes, one of which is obviously going to be an Uncle Ben scene, which we don't get because we've skipped right past that quickly, but still, there's stuff like that, obviously, but it still feels like the characters are so their own that it doesn't feel like it's just sort of like, well, we're doing this just with different characters. It does feel kind of like its own thing, so it does have that going for it. And then, like I was saying, as it goes on, and when he starts to get, like, hunted by different people for different reasons, some of those people, like, extremely close to him, it sort of gives stakes that we haven't quite seen in Spider-Man movies or really superhero movies, which is really nice. And the whole, what exactly the threat is here, mainly with them, the ultimate possibility of them getting stuck in the dimension that's not theirs. So they basically act like a Vanellope glitch throughout the movie, sometimes at the most inconvenient time. And yeah, so it does have a lot of surprises that it throws at you, like the new twist that they've done on Doc Ock, for instance. And like I said, the way they really just tend to mesh all these different tones is kind of amazing. And like I said, it seems to go above and beyond the whole idea of bringing a bunch of different heroes from different worlds together. The whole process of that had to have been excruciating, but it does pay off. So, and then, as far as the action goes, it is, for the most part, well executed. It's, once again, maybe it's a bit too flashy sometimes. Maybe it feels like it's maybe a little too energetic, but that's... You can only take that criticism so far. For the most part, it's really well executed and really pays off. And so, yeah, that's really all I can say, just repetitively tell you, good God, this movie is, fast and constant and energetic and all that, but also definitely has like a really big heart at its center for a number of characters, not necessarily just, the main character getting some certain payoff or whatever. There's like a whole bunch of different things going on here. Like I said, even the villain is like emotionally driven, which is really interesting. So, yeah, and then overall, just kind of looking at it as like this sort of celebration of creativity. The fact that they basically came up with the idea, and then whoever, the higher up people were, basically seemed to just say, just do whatever the fuck you want and go as crazy as you possibly want to. And that seems to be what's happened here. So like I said, I kind of wanted to love it more than I did, but I think I just felt like I just felt too busy trying to keep up with it. So it's probably something that I'll feel a lot better about if I were to see it again. So, but in the meantime, I do admire it for what it is, and am glad it exists. And yeah, so we'll see what kind of influence this has on future, maybe animated superhero movies, or at least superhero movies in general. And yeah, but once again, if we're going to do the meta thing, let's do it in the ways that maybe haven't been explored a million times before. That's mainly what I take away from that, apparently. So let's move on quickly to The Mule, which is Eastwood's second movie of the year. He is the Tyler Perry of old people, apparently. He can turn out 2 movies at a time. But this one being a true story. I think his character in the movie is Earl Stone. I think his name in real life is, or was Leo Sharp, I want to say. And we do this odd thing where we get, like, his backstory before anything else. And so it starts in 2005 and shows him as this, like, neglectful horticulturist. Like, the flowers are all he really cares about is his family that's being neglected, and it's like his daughter's wedding day, but all he wants to do is go get awards with his old friends and his veteran buddies and all that. And they establish him as like this ladies' man sort. And then we just kind of abruptly jump in time 12 years. And while that is jarring, it does actually have this interesting way of showing us what it was. Because it seems to mainly be to show that why his family doesn't care for him. Which is it probably could have been summed up in a couple of lines of dialogue instead of a whole prologue that took place 12 years before the events of the movie. But all right, but they do this interesting thing where the way they depict his character, and it could be a way to show that maybe he's slightly more broken down than he was, because when we first see him, he's got like, these really slimming suits, and he's like I said, he's got that lazy man vibe to him. He's got like really great posture and all that. He's like really smooth. And then when we see, there's something like, he looks like maybe 20 years younger. But then, obviously, when we jump in time, he's a bit more Eastwoody, like the way we know him now. He's kind of got that slight hunch, and he acts a bit older and all that. But, yeah, apart from that, I don't really know what the prologue is for, but regardless, we know that the direction this is headed is that he's going to inadvertently get a job offer to obliviously be a drug mule for this cartel. And it is interesting the way how long he stays oblivious. I know he's like 90, but this dude still seems like pretty sharp for the most part. But yeah, there are some things here though where it's like, there's weirdly a lot of comedy in it also, because they're kind of playing off the whole thing of, oh, he's doing this, but he's an old guy, so there's a lot of that, because he's old humor. Like, there's at least 20 scenes, probably, where he complains about young people on their phones. So he's still there. But the thing here also is that sometimes the people here are maybe just as incompetent as he is. Like, the whole thing where they give him a burner phone, but don't completely tell him what the concept is, where they have to explain to him what it's for and how to use it and how to answer it and all that. And then when he brings it back, they freak out. Because it's like, you're supposed to drop the burner phones, and it's like, if you told him everything but that, that's probably the most important thing to tell somebody that doesn't know about burner phones, is you throw them the fuck away. But nevertheless, some of that stuff kind of slips by. There's also the whole idea that he's so blissfully unaware of what's going on here, yet for some reason never questions the dude that's always standing next to him in the garage with a big-ass gun when he's getting his packages to take off, that he's not allowed to look in whatsoever, which of course he eventually will. But even then, that's nothing really particular tips him off. It's just out of curiosity he finally breaks and looks what it is. So there is sort of a distance here, and especially, like I said, especially the way they play up the sort of old man thing. Like, there's the whole thing of how he doesn't know how to text and all that, but then it's like a big deal when he figures it out. There's a scene where he talks to some bikers that's very... It feels more like it would have been in one of his movies in like the early 90s or something. It's really weird that it's in 2018, but nevertheless. But the thing here, though, is that the movie does make an interesting choice in regards to seeing things from his point of view, and kind of, I guess, giving the audience an idea of like how easy it is for him to be oblivious by not knowing what's going on. For like the entire first half of the movie, we never ourselves see the exchanges. Because it's like, they put him in the back of the truck and they say, go ahead and take these to here, and then when you get there, you'll have your money. And it's pretty much cuts of him driving down the road and then getting back in the truck and seeing the money there. Like, the exchanges are never shown, like, on screen for most of the movie. And I feel like that's an interesting choice to show us just how sort of blind he is to it. Though, like I said, it feels like he's sharp enough to where these clues that are staring him directly in the face should be tipping him off by now, but whatever. I guess they'll do the he's old thing for that too. But the other thing I do like here is that the whole idea that he is, like a war veteran, and he's got sort of tough quality to him. So even though he's doing the constant old man thing, he's never like frail in the face of aggressiveness. And some of these guys get super aggressive. Like, there's one dude obviously even puts a gun to his chest, and he's just well, I was in the war. This doesn't threaten me, and that's it. That's he just doesn't even. There's one guy that like gets right up in his face and tries to psych him out, but he doesn't even flinch. And so I do like that. That's kind of part of his character also, which does show you that it was pretty much this was basically tailor made for Eastwood to play it. It is. I mean, there are going to be probably some inevitable comparisons. There's like a lot to compare here with Gran Torino, because you've got him as the guy that's maybe a bit too old to be flirting with the danger that he's flirting with. There's many awkward interactions with minorities where he's gonna Eastwood his way through these conversations. There's a slightly uncomfortable scene when he stops to change a tire and everything's all nice and helpful until it just gets... It doesn't even get, like, really, really deeply uncomfortable. It just gets really awkward. And so every now and then there's a scene like that. And then the whole thing of his family basically separating themselves from him, more or less. So there's a weird amount of Gran Torino in here, but still, there is, like, a much different tone. Like I said, this one has a surprising amount of, like, almost like a comedic vibe to it. And I think another thing that keeps that going is another interesting choice he made to sort of omit from this entirely is, despite the fact that there are certainly scenes that are implied to have this, and just given the fact that he's running with like the cartel business and all that, I don't recall any violence on screen. So there's like one major scene that implies it, but it feels less like implied violence and more like they just completely forgot to shoot a scene, and it just jumps from one thing to the other, and it's like there's this really crucial scene missing, like right at the end. But apart from that, I still think it's quite interesting that he almost avoided the violence aspect entirely. So, like I said, so you can see those choices that he made to like go completely in these directions that sort of totally make the tone of this movie, whereas it could be the same story, but if you just put these elements into it that are only implied, it would be like a totally different tone. It would be like a significantly darker movie, but it takes all that out and sort of keeps it as this sort of light thing. Obviously, that depends on the person, if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I do think it's an interesting way to kind of show that that's really, like, maybe one or two scenes is all it really takes to change the entire tone of a movie. Because, like I said, if you just put two scenes in this movie that are implied, the tone is fucked, like, completely. Unless you take these more comedic moments out or make them not as blatantly comedic, to the point that he seems like he should be starring in, like, Las Vegas or some shit. But still, it still is, like, you know, another strong performance from him for sure, and he's got a whole bunch of supporting players here that are recognizable, mainly the cops, who are Bradley Cooper and Michael Pena, and to an extent Lawrence Fishburne. And the thing here with them, though, is that they're introduced so early, but we pretty much know what their purpose is eventually going to be. So it's like we've got Eastwood going on, and then we've got them going on kind of parallel. And this goes on for a while, and there's really not a whole lot to the Cooper Pena scenes, to the point that we get a lot of them when we cut to them, but it's like there's really no substance in those scenes. We're literally just waiting for them. We're just waiting for paths to cross because we know that's where we're headed. So it kind of would have been nice, especially when you have actors like Bradley Cooper and Michael Pena who are clearly capable of so much. Really could have done more than just say, like, you know, investigative, you know, terminology or whatever. But, see, I feel like they probably could have done more with that. And, of course, there's also, given the idea of the story and all that, it's like, there should be a lot of suspense here, or there should be a lot of setups for that, but not really so much. He kind of showed us earlier this year with 1570 to Paris, where it's kind of like his, you know, he's kind of abandoned tension a little bit when it seems like this should absolutely be here. Because we do have a couple of blatant close call scenes, obviously, where like a cop's going to pull him over and he's got all the drugs and shit in the back, and it's like, will he be found out? Will he won't? I don't think he's going to be found out 25 minutes into the movie, but whatever. And then there's this kind of really ridiculous scene. That's this big old fake out where he gets he gets stopped, and the guys that he's with, they're like there to basically shadow him while he does this to make sure he's doing everything right. They get antagonized by a cop, and Eastwood basically just flat out says, "Why don't you come back here? You're gonna really want to see something in the back of my truck. Like, come here and check this thing out." And they really build it up like he's taking the cop over there, and it's like, are we really supposed to believe that Eastwood's character, who's been really good at this so far, is just gonna drop everything and outright say, "Hey, come look at the drugs in the back of my truck"? No, like that doesn't even count as a fake out. There was no there was no possibility of that being anywhere the direction they made it look like they wanted us to believe it was going. So a lot of it's like that. There's one scene involving Bradley Cooper in a thermos where I was kind of like, "Oh, is this it?" But very brief, and for the most part, it's mostly like the that other scene. So they really could have probably done more with that. But some more on the side characters. We do have Andy Garcia is a lot of fun. Is this basically the main drug dude that's making all this happen, that he's doing the jobs for. And then there is Clifton Collins Jr. actually is really, really underutilized because he actually becomes significantly more important than we realized he was when he first came on it, which, being a recognizable actor, you kind of imagine that, but then once he does become important, it's kind of like the movie doesn't really care. and they're like, "Oh, he'll do a couple of these things, and then that'll be about it." And then, probably most notably in regards to the side characters, besides Andy Garcia, would be Diane Wiest as Eastwood's ex-wife, which is interesting because I don't know that I've seen her in anything since Rabbit Hole, which was 8 years ago. And she's usually, like, sort of the go-to actress for this kind of role, and it seems like it should really be this big deal. And she's kind of only barely there until they finally decide to make her a huge deal at the end, where it's like, obviously she's not in the Oscar running, but if she were, she's got like a whole 10-minute chunk here of Oscar clips in these final scenes. So yeah, I do feel like they could have utilized her a lot more also, apart from just doing the, generic family drama scenes. So, yeah, so he makes some interesting choices here. Like I said, it really depends on the person if they're good choices or not. I'm fine with some of these. Like I said, if anything, they're interesting to see exactly the kind of tone he was trying to make here. But it does, like, bludgeon you over the head with just about everything, whether it be the messages about family or those really, blatant fake-out scenes, or him being old and him not understanding what young people do and all that. So I mean, it's fine. That probably makes it sound a bit more silly than it does end up coming off. But yeah, like, it is one of those things where I liked it like quite a bit while I was watching it, but now that I'm sitting here going over all of it again, it's sort of like, it's okay, I guess. Certainly better than his earlier movie this year, so at least he's got that going for him. So, and, once again, since the dude is actually pushing 90, and that he's putting out, like 2 movies a year, and the fact that, is... I obviously, they do seem a bit like, the way he quickly works and how you can tell, like, that's probably suffering in post-production and all that, but still, this is clearly a guy that still knows what he's doing very well at the age that he's at. So it's... Yeah, so even then, like, even if this movie was just like a total shitfest, it would still at least have some sort of value of interest based on that alone. So it does have that. So, speaking of the Oscar contenders, the actual Oscar contenders, we'll go on to Roma. Obviously, Alfonso Cuarón's new movie that's been really built up for quite some time, hitting all the, big festivals, getting this enormous praise. Like, it's probably his most praised movie at this point, which is really saying something from the guy that made Children of Men and Gravity. Itamama Tambien, Prisoner of Azkaban, whatever. And so the interesting thing about it, though, is that when you can see kind of immediately where this is coming from if you are aware of what it is or where it's coming from with it basically being like this almost autobiographical thing. I think he said like 90% of the movie comes from his memory. Whether I don't know if that includes, you know, maybe false memories or jumbled memories, but nevertheless, 90% of this apparently comes from his memory. So it's in Mexico, and it's 1970, I think, and it's basically just this. It's the wealthy family, and they've got, you know, the two housekeepers. But the thing is it's basically a coming of age movie, just from the perspective of the adults, more or less. Um, and obviously, like we've been talking about throughout the awards videos, it's got a lot going against it in regards to finding an audience, because we've got, you know, there's all the actors are unknowns, it's black and white, it's foreign, but, you know, it's on the very easily accessible Netflix, so it'll be really interesting to see what the wide reaction to this is. We already know what probably the awards reaction will be, and certainly the critical one, but the thing that I kind of immediately want to talk about is, even though there is, like, you know, a whole lot of emotion watching these characters and what they go through and all that, and basically it just being these people going through all the ins and outs of life together, whether it be the most hardcore emotional or whether the most mundane, and how they get through it together. But, I mean, given that it's a horror movie, one of the first things you'll want to notice is what it looks like and how it was shot. Which he shot himself. I was under the impression that he was going to have somebody else shoot it, but everybody basically convinced him to do it himself so that he could basically, you know, single-handedly recreate his memories through his own vision and not have any sort of middleman in between, which seems to have really, really paid off for him. So you have these shots that are, for starters, the ones in the house, when it's, once again, Cuarón is basically one of the ultimate masters of the long take, particularly long takes that you don't always notice, which are obviously some of the best. So we've got these shots where, like, it pans over one floor of the house, and we get, like, all the different rooms and all that. So we basically get the whole vibe of the house in just this one shot as the camera turns, but then we'll go, like, to a different floor, like downstairs or something, and get the same shot. But the thing is with the editing, even though we've, like, jumped down a floor, it's just so fluid that this all basically feels like it's one shot. And really gives us all just that whole entire feeling in one, and just shots like that, that are, at least when you look at them, look like they'd be really simple. But then you've also got stuff like, this movie's just basically made to be marveled at, cinematography-wise, because you've also got some stuff that's sort of, every now and then, like, obviously you feel like it comes completely from Cuarón's heart and his memory and all that, but there are also, every now and then, some cases where you get the vibe of another director, sort of like this scene where a big fire has been started and all the people there are trying to put it out, and this dude in a costume just sort of comes into the foreground and starts singing as everybody's putting the fire out in the background, and then it's not so much the scene where the moment, it's all the same shot, not so much the moment of him singing, but it's kind of the shot of him walking back into the pandemonium. Really gave me a Tarkovsky vibe, which I'm sure there's other shots in this you can compare to him also, but even so, there's also kind of reminded me of what we talked about with The Shape of Water last year, where it's like, I really love, there's always something really personal to me when you can tell there's something personal when a director puts, like, a love of movies in their movies. So here there are a couple of scenes involving them going to a movie theater. There's one that's particularly heartbreaking, and there's just that sort of, like, it's kind of a heartbreaking, like, this scene could have been set anywhere, and it would have had sort of the same impact, but the whole idea of, like, a certain character feeling really alone as everybody else is, like, walking out of the room, and we see the credits rolling on the curtain, it's like, it just kind of adds that sort of extra touch also. And then there's an interesting choice where they go to see Marooned, but the thing is instead of, once again, it may give you obvious gravity flashbacks given Cuarón's name, but this interesting choice where we know they're in the theater watching Marooned, but we don't see the clip of it like it's on a movie screen, and we don't have any cuts to like them watching it or an audience watching it. It's just a clip of Marooned in the place here, which I just found kind of interesting, especially with seeing Marooned in black and white. Suddenly seems like it would be a really interesting thing to see also. So and then obviously there's also the shots that like a lot of them are standing back, and then they're like distant shots, and there's some cases where it's like the shots are like gradually getting bigger, but like I said, the thing that he can really do well is make you not notice this. So there'll be times where the camera's like slowly making the shot bigger, but you only start to notice this when you see how small the people are getting, when you realize just how big the actual shot is. Especially when you've got something close in the foreground, and like that in the distance also just really adds to the big spectacle of it. And then I talked about Del Toro. Might as well bring Inarritu into this since they're all the trio, as it were. When I talked about The Revenant, particularly like the opening scene, I was saying that Inarritu has this way of constantly making me ask how he does something, like how he gets a particular shot. And there's also a shot like that. There's probably a couple of shots like that in this, but one in particular towards the end at the beach was a shot where it's just like, how is this even accomplished? And the fact that we still have directors and cinematographers that can make you ask that question in 2018 is amazing, especially when you're just telling stories like this about a family with no real, obviously there's going to be big dramatic points, but you know what I mean, like the big melodrama and all that. And while there are certain bleak aspects to it, and mundane aspects to it, it does also find ways to inject humor into it that don't feel like if a movie is serious enough, sometimes injecting humor into it can almost seem miscalculated. Even if it needs it, usually it's not put in the right place, or like you get what they were trying to do, but it just comes off wrong or off. But here, but particularly the scene, like the drive to the hospital was the most obvious one. Where it's like, it's a sight gag, which is something you don't really expect in a movie like this, but it's able to do it without being like overly silly about it, or like overly over the top, but it really gets the point across as if it's this almost slapsticky thing, but yet somehow works in the context, especially with all the otherwise drama surrounding it. And it's, obviously it is one of those things where it does, this is not the format I would have chosen to see this, and I'm sure, like, I'm probably doing it a disservice even talking about it, having not seen it, like, the way, like, it's very easy to tell how, even though they did the whole Netflix thing, that Quarren was insistent it at least get on some theater screens. So hopefully most people see it that way. I really, really hope I get a chance to somehow. In the area I live in, I'm not getting my hopes up, but I'm gonna hope for it anyway. And so that makes me think about some problems I might have had, where it's like maybe I would have a totally different opinion if that were the case, if I had a much bigger presentation of it. Because sometimes it does seem, well, most of it does speak for the story and also just, have this, makes the whole movie this beautiful thing in general. There are some cases where it did feel like maybe some of the shots are a bit empty, and it's more like it's the cinematography for the sake of it. One scene that comes to mind is the martial arts instructor, whoever he was. I know he's doing this particular theme with planes in the sky and like the whole, expanding and all that, but even so, every now and then, just not frequently whatsoever, I kind of got the vibe that it was like, I kind of just feel like he's showing off, and I don't really, there's not much particular in this particular moment. But I think also it's the fact that, and I guess I was hearing that some people had this problem, despite all of its praise, where every now and then I did have trouble, like, sort of connecting emotionally, where it does almost feel, I don't even know necessarily if it's the fact that Quarren makes it feel too distant, like how some of his shots sometimes feel a bit maybe too big when they should be a bit more confined, but I don't know as far as the characters go, but that's not to say that it didn't ever happen. There is one particular scene kind of somewhat towards the end. But the thing about this scene, though, is that in another movie, probably from a less skilled director, this is the sort of scene where, well, there's two things going on here. You could say a lesser movie would shy away from it and hardly show any of it at all, or just imply it, or whatever. Or another way to look at it would be that maybe it's showing too much, and it's like it's almost sort of exploitively in your face with it. But the way Quaron handles this scene is he doesn't shy away from it, showing you it, but there's still a sensitivity to how it's shown. Like, he's not rubbing our faces in it, but it's there enough to leave nothing to the imagination. And how the scene just keeps going and going in this one shot, which is, to my understanding, they only shot like one time, and it's, yeah. So that really took a lot in regards to the choices he made and exactly how it was done to kind of walk that fine line of what to show and in what fashion to show it. And I can't think of really a more perfect way to have done it. So that stuff like that is what really makes him the filmmaker that he is. And so, and I was saying that there's like sometimes when you see some of the shots, like I said, it's almost like the composition is too much, and sometimes you're just asking the question why. But like I said, if I had seen it on a better format, maybe that would have made a difference, because it's like if you're immersed enough, like if you were to ask why, some people would probably think like that just wouldn't matter if you're immersed enough in it. But so that's probably, so yeah, there's probably so much more I could say if I saw it in the proper format, but like I said, I don't know how possible that's going to be given where I am, so I just kind of had to deal with it. Another thing that actually did stand out, though, that I was not expecting at all, especially since this is a movie that's like I said, will show you the mundane on top of the dramatic, but also have some scenes that are like basically like they're happening in real time, practically, to really give you that, realism when observing them. But the pacing is kind of amazing. This does not at all feel as long. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. It does not feel that long at all. It's just like, it does somehow feel like it immerses you enough to where it feels like it's constantly going, even if, like I said, it's basically just living in the moment sometimes. You get lost enough in it, even, like I said, even on a small screen, apparently, that it just doesn't, it's, yeah, so that's, and really all of his movies feel that way, come to think of it. At least, the ones that we're talking about, not like necessarily his Great Expectations or anything like that, but even so, yeah, so that's basically what this is. It's basically Quaron showing us everything in his memory and refusing to look away from it, thus making us not be able to look away from it also, and just to really capture that in this way that, like I said, even you could probably imagine trying to capture a movie this way, but surely, something would go off or it wouldn't quite turn out the way you want it to. This feels like exactly what he wanted it to be, and with nothing else in between, so that's probably all he could have asked for, and all we could have asked for as the people watching it, so, yeah. Next, we'll go on to Mortal Engines, I guess. So I didn't really know much about what this was, except they were really, really plugging the idea that Peter Jackson had his name on it. There's going to be so many people that go into this thinking Peter Jackson made this movie. He did write it, apparently, with Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh, his usual collaborators. But the director is the guy that I think was like one of his visual effects guys and like a storyboard artist for him. For most of his stuff, if not all of his stuff. So that's an interesting place to start. Like, it does feel like there's some potential there, where it's not like they just picked off some dude off the street or anything. But even so, it is one of those movies that is based on like this sort of young adult type novel, and it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, etc. Has the young savior with the, almost too good-looking sidekick or whatever, and it's yeah, this is one of those cases yet again where it's like I could tell there was going to be an issue, and I could tell it was one of those sort of young adult style things because it was. All I did was like, maybe I should look in case it's like super complicated and I need more backstory to understand what's going on. Maybe I should at least look up like a little 2 or 3 line synopsis or something because I didn't really know anything about what it was about. And even in just like a 2 or 3 line synopsis, like every other damn thing was in quotes, where it was doing the whole world building thing, where every fucking thing has its own terminology, and it's like you feel less like you're reading a description and more like you're studying for a fucking test. And it's so yeah, that didn't really give me a good vibe going in. But I was obviously going to try to stay as open to it as possible when I went in. So it does. I mean, it does throw you off at the start, not just because it's trying to do so much of that world building thing or whatever, but also I know world building should be something that's like, really praised and really ambitious and all that, but it's like it's just gotten so. All these damn worlds that are getting built are just the same goddamn world with a few slightly different touches. Mainly changed by their obsessive use of their own terminology. Just all these damn stories. But then, you look at a movie like this, and another thing that kind of threw me off was I wasn't expecting a bizarre Minions joke 5 minutes in. When I got out of the movie, I actually had to look that up just to make sure I wasn't seeing things, because it's there enough to show it, but it cuts away still relatively fast, and we never see it or it's referenced again. So I was like, did I hallucinate that? I am not sure. Apparently, it was Mickey Mouse in the books, so it's like in the context, it's the joke. There is a joke there, like it's not some random reference, but even so, really caught me off guard. But anyway, so we got this whole idea that's somewhat exciting about the whole idea of a city that moves. But it's not quite like a Dark City thing, but a bit more of that generic post-apocalyptic look to it, just imagine. And of course, we've got our young heroine, as we always do. Hester is this character that has apparently been horribly, terribly scarred by Hugo Weaving the day that he killed her family or something. So she's here to get revenge, and the story's going to go from there. But we do finally get to see exactly what's going on. She wears like a scarf to cover up her hideous deformity, and the sort of thing. Like, if you were to see this and like the way it plays out and the way people react to her, and the fact that it's such a defining trait for her, it's like you would think she looks like fucking Freddy Krueger or something. That's like a red line, like right about here. That's the big hideous deformity that completely shapes this character. So we've got that, and obviously she's gonna be one of those characters just like constantly pressing her backstory on us like every fucking chance she gets, because the movie doesn't really have much else to fill its runtime with. It just barely reaches 2 hours, or no, I think it's like maybe 2:10, but obviously 10 of that's gonna be credits, so it's about 2 hours. So. Yeah, but I mean, there is a little promise in the fact that we do have a villain in Hugo Weaving. Even though, it's probably a lazy choice to have Hugo Weaving play your villain, he always tends to be the right choice, even if he's, a tad of a boring choice, but he's always going to bring something to it, so it does have that going for it. Another kind of scary-ass villain we have here is Stephen Lang as a cyborg, which is really funny, because we only ever really see him as, like, mostly, they say he's a cyborg, but he's mostly on the surface, like, looks robotic, but just like the outline, just the silhouette of him as he rises in his first scene, it's like just by his layout you can tell it's Stephen Lang. And they do come from like an understandably emotional direction with him that they probably could have elaborated on a little further. And when it comes down to him and Hester, there is something here where it's like, it's basically like if T2, like if the aftermath of T2 was John Connor having to fight the good Terminator, is what their story is basically. So you can see where there's an emotion in that for sure. But it's very, very few and far between, and the movie doesn't really care to elaborate on that. And it all does feel... That whole storyline, much as it is a nice setup, it does eventually end up in a very rushed direction. So there's that. And then, of course, we've got her... we've got the main dude here that's... his name is Tom, who's played by Robert Sheen, I think is his name, who was the guy in Bad Samaritan with David Tennant. He's that guy where, like, when you see him in this, you can tell that the studio so badly wants him to be, like, a heartthrob poster child that promotes this movie or whatever, but not really. I mean, he does... he has, like, enough of a presence, and he was decent enough in Bad Samaritan also, but... And he does every now and then bring, like, a sense of humor that the movie desperately needs. Like, when they've been trapped for a while and all they're drinking is, like, you know, puddles of water off the ground and shit. And, like, everything is terrible. He eventually gets offered tea by these people, and when he drinks it, he says, it's not bad. But the fact that it's because of their environment, because it's not bad, is, like, cause for celebration. Just his delivery of that was kind of funny. And like I said, it's the sort of kind of, you know, little sparks that the movie was in need of a lot more of, but is not really that interested in. It's interested in the big flying machines and the really basic-ass characters and rebellions and, you know, political villains and whatever the fuck else was going on here. I don't know. Basically the same conflict in every other goddamn young adult rebellion movie in the post-apocalyptic world. There's really... It is kind of crazy this comes from Peter Jackson and his team, because it's like... These still just totally blur together. I really can't tell these fucking things apart anymore. And it does also get to... I mean, obviously before, you know, it gets into all that, there is something to be said here about the effects. Obviously, given where they're coming from, the effects at least are going to be very good, even given the talent involved, even if, like I said, it's what those effects are showing is going to become very tiresome very fast, if it's not tiresome from the second you see them, because you've seen this shit so many times before. So really, that's the only thing this could bring to this that the other movies may not have, is better effects. Which sounds like, in a movie like this that's so busy action-wise, could mean something good, but not really. It's the same old shit still. And then we also get to a point where it does just start to feel very, very long, because it does, like, we get to a point where it does start to feel like a climax, but there's still like 45 minutes left. And the thing about that is, like, yeah, there's so many things unresolved, how could you possibly think it's a climax? Well, you'll notice something about these, you know, young adult dystopian movies. They all want to be franchises. This is I don't know how many books this is, but it's like, when you know it's a franchise, it's like, they do have that freedom to leave things unresolved. So it's like, if there's going to be story points that look like they're not going to be resolved at all, in movies like this, it's just common now. Remember the end of The Golden Compass? Yeah. I only saw this, like, today, and I don't even have... That's pretty much all I really have to say about it. Like, nothing else can possibly come to me. It just all blends together with the same old shit. And it's... Yeah, and, like, it's really crazy, the names that are on this, especially as writers, because even in that department, it's like, there's really nothing new here whatsoever. Just the same bland-ass show with the same bland-ass characters and the same bland-ass, you know, world. So we're just going to leave that at that. Then we'll go on to Instant Family. Something else that also kind of surprised in the kind of reaction that it got, where it was like, when I heard of its existence, and kind of heard about it, I basically got the impression that it was Mark Wahlberg kind of doing another Daddy's Home type movie. Just maybe a bit more family-friendly, I guess. But then word starts coming out that it's like this really realistic portrayal of adoption, and it's like really emotional, it's like based on a real family and all that. And the critics really like it, and it's like, okay. Well, maybe I waited too long to see it, and all that stuff kind of got to my head, because I don't know that it's entirely different from what I had initially thought it was before I heard all that. as in basically another family-friendly Daddy's Home with Mark Wahlberg. Um, because when I heard that, I was under the impression that maybe it was going to be a bit more serious, especially since it was taking the whole adoption thing so seriously. But it's still kind of the same movie where we've got like the same sort of style of humor where it's like you just get a whole bunch of people in the room and it sort of feels like really stale improv where it's like really repetitive comedy dialogue where most characters just kind of say the same lines over and over and over again, and the longer they keep saying the same thing, the funnier it's supposed to be. We kind of start off like that kind of movie, and that does kind of continue throughout. There are way too many jokes that they bank on so much they just kind of keep coming back. But then that's the opening to kind of show us the two of them, Wahlberg and Rose Byrne. So then it goes into the whole idea of them, being foster parents to these three kids, and then because the whole setup is that all the parents want kind of like the newborns or the babies. They don't want the teenagers that are not only already basically established in life, but also, hellions. So obviously there's going to be the normal complications when they take them home and all that. It's going to be like problem child times 3 and all that, and the teenage girl is going to be bitchy, the boy is going to be like really paranoid and scared of everything, and the little girl is going to be like obnoxious, I guess. And that's pretty much the extent of it. And then it does, and you can kind of see where like maybe there was the potential here to like because the whole idea is to show the difficulty of starting new families and all that. But the thing is like the connection that they make feels pretty sudden. Like it doesn't feel like the conflict is there enough that they sort of where they kind of try to find common ground. But the thing also is that I guess the reason they do that and the reason the connection's so sudden is because we're going to keep having that conflict like as a common thing throughout the movie. Like it's like there's like a bunch of conflicts in this movie, and every single one of them is, well, the kids hate them again. And once again, I'm sure there's some realism there for sure, with especially teenagers, with the way they sort of bounce around, whether they love or hate you or whatever. But watching it as a movie, it can be a bit grating. So especially since once again, I don't know, after Roma and now this, I don't know if I was just lacking emotion today or what, but I just really didn't seem to be connecting to anything this week, so emotionally this week apparently. So what we have here is these three kids that they're supposed to be the heartwarming moments where we kind of see where they're coming from and all that, but this is where the confusing thing lies, particularly in the middle. Because there's something here that should be, it feels like it's trying to show us deep within the trauma that these kids come from in the household that they come from. But the movie's choice is to play this up as comedy. Because we've got, like, the scene where the little girl has set up a restaurant with, like, her stuffed animals or whatever. But playing restaurant to her is yelling at the kids to shut up. Because that's obviously what she's probably seen her own parents do or whatever. And then there's the thing where the boy thinks he's going to basically get in trouble and beaten for everything that he does, even the small things. Which sounds really dramatic, doesn't it? But really the payoff to this is a joke where they're in the supermarket and he does something that Wahlberg sees, and he says, like, oh no, don't hit me, and ducks. And everybody gasps because they think Mark Wahlberg's like a child beater. And it's played for comedy, and the restaurant thing's played for comedy also. So the tone is a little confusing here in regards to how seriously, or maybe not so seriously, it turns out it wants to take this material. And then that's also the case when, at the beginning, when they decide they're going to try this adoption thing. But the thing is they're at this, support group or whatever, and they're doing the whole thing where there's this whole joke that the movie will not let die, where this woman's idea is to basically live out the blind side and get like a big black athlete for a son, and she's like a small white woman or whatever. And they just keep bringing up over and over and over and over again that this woman's trying to live out the blind side, and they're making it this big comedy scene and this joke that goes on and on and on. And then in the very next moment, a girl comes in and talks about how I was raised in a meth lab and I was sexually and physically abused, and it's like, what in the fuck tone-wise is happening here? Probably the most egregious of this is the fact that towards the end we get this whole sort of subplot where the teenage girl, who's like 15, has this guy that she likes, Jacob, and there's this whole back and forth where, like, maybe he's the type of boyfriend, maybe he isn't, and then she eventually gets caught taking nude selfies of herself to send to him because he's forcing her to. Like, he's sending her texts saying, you know, like, I'm gonna stop talking to you if you don't send me, you know, naked pictures and all that, and then he, you know, does the whole dick pic thing and all that. And you think, okay, so that's what's going on with the teenage girl, but there's a little twist to this, which is Jacob is not a classmate, he's the 22-year-old janitor. Once again, this is something that they're going to decide to play for comedy. What do you do with this? How do you... I don't know. Maybe some people think it's risky that a movie that's supposedly family-friendly goes for this and makes this really dark stuff into something humorous. I don't know. This is really bizarre and really kind of unsettling a little bit. So that's what, like, the whole middle portion of the movie is. It's just really tone-deaf shit like that. So they are trying. They've got some, you know, supporting cast here, like Michael O'Keefe and Julie Haggerty as Rose Byrne's parents, which we probably could have used more of. But for the most part, the casting is, like, just really, really boring. Because, like I said, we've got Wahlberg basically doing another Daddy's Home thing. Rose Byrne is basically doing another variation of her character from Neighbors. We got Octavia Spencer as the person that's in charge of the whole adoption thing, which just sort of seems painfully obvious and such a boring presence here, because it's like, well, yeah, of course that's the part she's going to play. And her partner in this is Tig Notaro, who is, you know, about as... a comedian who is about as funny as a cemetery. So... That's just my personal opinion on her, but even so. And then you've got, like, you know, insert current famous comedian dude as the friend. So that's... And then there's this really weird scene towards the end where everything's sort of resolving itself, and they just decide to throw Joan Cusack into the mix as this really weird neighbor who's, like, lonely... And so she's, like, living vicariously through them. And it's only, like, one scene, and it's... I don't know what the hell this was. And then, of course, despite everything that I said, they're going to take every possible chance that they can to be all icky sweet and play the soundtrack and all that shit. So, I don't... I know the icky sweet thing, this is just the kind of movie that is... But I don't know. I was just... Because that's the thing, is if you're going to sort of accept this movie and sort of fall into the whole, oh, this kind of thing is sweet, or oh, this kind of thing is emotional thing, you kind of got to be into it from the get-go. So apparently a lot of people were, but I think because it kind of didn't click with me from the very start, none of this was going to. So... Yeah, so I hate to, like, rain on everyone's parade and all that really liked this, but, it's apparently not my kind of thing at all. Speaking of things that are kind of not my thing at all, let's end on The Possession of Hannah Grace. So, this is yet another possession movie that was basically, what was it, a couple years ago we had, Incarnate come out, like, right around this time, so I guess this is the possession period, is the first week of December when nothing else is coming out. I don't think it's going to help you make any more money if you release it with no competition. So, so you start off, and it's just the very first scene is yet another routine exorcism scene. And so it's like, you imagine going back to, like, 1973 and, like, telling the audiences back then reacting to The Exorcist how, like, boring and routine exorcism scenes would become. And it's like, their heads would probably explode. And it's like, I don't know if Friedkin probably feels, like, disappointed that this is all his influence has come to, or if he's, like, really satisfied that he's not even going to come close to getting topped. I don't know. So, I mean, they do throw in something here. Like, there is, like, a wicked, head impaling during this exorcism. But apart from that, it's really just serving as this intro. Because after that, we immediately jump to 3 months later, with our main character getting a job at the morgue. And then this is, like, this very short movie, 10 minutes in, has an opening credit sequence, finally. That's just her jogging, more or less. Nothing creepy or anything, just her jogging, whatever. And then, obviously, once she starts working there, we are introduced to all the different characters who don't really matter because they have, like, one personality trait, if any trait whatsoever, and they're all a bunch of no-name actors. Where it's like, horror movies are pretty much the only thing that can, like, get away with having no-name actors in their movies and getting them released in really, really wide in theaters without being, like, straight to DVD. But for the most part, that's probably where this should have ended up. I'm kind of shocked it actually didn't. I don't know what the hell this even how this even qualifies as a theatrical release, but okay. So you'll get shit like one of her coworkers, she'll open the door to, like, the slab or whatever, and then one of her coworkers will pop out from behind the door, and it's like he'll do the whole, he even though he was back there and he did the whole head popping out thing, and he's gonna be he's got, like, the doofy clown hair, so he's the comedy relief or whatever. But of course, even though he waited behind this door and then popped out like that, as she's walking away angrily, he has to say, "I didn't mean to." And then her response to that is, "That's not funny." Long pause. "That's really not funny." It's like, oops, did you run out of dialogue by accident also? Alright, so this actually, though, does have the potential, had the potential to be kind of something, like, at least genuinely eerie. Like, maybe if they didn't try to, like, maybe they were better off targeting eerie as opposed to, like, big and scary and all that. It probably would have done them a lot more favors. This is something that, just given the setting and the setup, probably could have been, if it was more downplayed, probably could have been something more effective. Like, this is one of those movies where you can, like, easily improve the quality of the movie by taking the score out. But nevertheless, we've got to do the whole big, scary thing, and it's like, even when you see something just remotely creepy, the score has to, like, scream in your face and all that. They do try, character traits. They try to give her the cop backstory. They try to give her a drug habit she's recently kicked. None of this really has to do with anything. It makes people, like, question whether or not she's telling the truth when she sees, corpses moving and shit, but it's like, you could have done that with any setup. You could have given her no setup at all, and the payoff would have been exactly the same. And it's like, adding her backstory does nothing for this except take up time and pad the runtime of this, once again, really short-ass movie, so why the backstory's in there. It has nothing to do with any sort of impact this character might have. So basically her purpose might as well just be to, like, her sole purpose is to be scared. That's all she really has to do. We didn't need her being a cop. We didn't need her having a drug problem. We didn't need her having an ex-boyfriend. None of that. The whole missing Xanax bottle. What are you doing? Every now and then, though, like I said, there is potential. Like, it does have some interesting developments. Like the fact that, like, it's not necessarily a ghost angle. It's like this actual, potentially dead body doing it itself. That's been mangled and, like, half burned and has its throat cut open and all that. But, like, the more it kills, the more it, like, heals itself. I know that's a bit of a Jeepers Creepers thing, but it still kind of makes it feel like its own thing, at least a little bit. And there's some, like, memorably brutal death scenes, like the whole breaking body sort of thing. Like I said, there's a head impaling at the beginning and all that. It does try to kind of do a claustrophobia thing to get some scares, but it's like, given the setting and how mostly generic this movie is, claustrophobia is really just kind of a given in this movie. Like, obviously there's going to be a scene where she's in one of the doors with it closed and all that, and it's like, it would have been a problem if they didn't do that. The fact that they did do it was basically just, like, a box they needed to check. There's really not much they can do with it, and they don't, really. And then, of course, we get really rushed, half-assed backstory on Hannah Grace herself, which leads us right into a really, really rushed climax. Like, the climax just really, like, abruptly shows up. Like, we don't even realize that like halfway into the climax that we're even in the climax. It feels like so little has happened up to this point to build up to it, and we've gotten so little just invested in or going into it at all. So, but like I said, unlike a lot of movies like this, you can actually see the potential inside it. Like, this actually could have been something probably decent if it just wasn't made as another generic like mainstream horror movie. So yeah, so that's pretty much what that was. So that's going to be the end of this one. Next week is like Aquaman and Bumblebee. Maybe Welcome to Marwen. Assuming we have showtimes for it, but I can totally see this being one of those cases where they just axe the showtimes at the last minute. So I guess we'll find out. Maybe they'll throw us an awards movie or something, like Green Book or something. I was going to ask, if a manager was there today, I was going to ask them if there's any chance we're getting Green Book, but I did not run into a manager, so I have no fucking idea. So, yeah, so we're about to finish the Blunt thing. We've got a few more verses to finish this year off, and then I don't know what the hell's happening in January. We'll figure that out as we go, apart from award stuff, obviously. So, yeah, so until all that, that's it.